The Celestial Toymaker is now the most recent missing Doctor Who story to receive the animation treatment. On the face of it, it's a rather difficult task. One thing that always held back the reconstruction of the story from being particularly entertaining was the fact that the episodes were extremely visual in nature, with obstacle courses, dancing, and searching through rooms. However, a hell of a curveball came around when we found out that it was being done in the style of the widely derided Web of Fear animation. The Web of Fear style involved cel-shaded 3D animated models, rather than the usual 2D rotoscoping. Unfortunately, the animation looked like an extremely awkward PlayStation 2 game, as the characters struggled to show any emotion and walked out of rooms while flailing their limbs all over the place in a desperate attempt to breathe life into completely lifeless character models. So naturally, I, along with every other fan, was very apprehensive about the Celestial Toymaker adopting a similar style, and I'd be lying if I said I went into watching this not expecting it to be a disaster. Well, how did it do in the end? There's certainly a lot more positives than I expected, so let's start with them. The very visual set pieces in the story definitely benefit from the 3D style. Often the 2D animations have very stilted movement. They're much better for capturing dialogue than anything else, which isn't really the focus of the Celestial Toymaker. The action, so to speak, is well choreographed in the animation too, especially given the difficulty of translating TV to animation, and it's clear what is going on at all times, which may sound like faint praise, but given how difficult that can be in this format, I'm impressed. This is a boon to the story, as the recon often felt ponderous and disjointed, which at the time I thought was a script issue, but actually with the visuals for all of the Toymaker's games, the story feels a lot more cohesive, which helps in developing a strong atmosphere, and it kept me more than entertained throughout. The action wasn't just a close translation of the original, but chooses to let loose with the imaginative potential that lay dormant in a plot as ethereal as the Celestial Toymaker. The original story on its tiny budget could never quite capture the uncanny and otherworldly qualities the story had in mind. But unmoored by physical restrictions, the animation takes liberties, but liberties that feel well within keeping of the intentions of the writer. The obstacle course no longer obeys gravity. The Toymaker is able to change size and shape at will. The side characters all look like toys brought to life, heightening the creepy, uncanny qualities the story possesses. I know these changes may be controversial to some, given the deviation from the source material, but personally, I can accept and even appreciate these changes when it feels like they're within the intended spirit of the story. For example, I strongly dislike the changes in The Fury from the Deep, as the vast rooms which replace the close-knit sets of the original completely remove the feeling of claustrophobia and of being surrounded, which is what made the original story so memorable and so frightening. Whereas here, the changes complement the story's intentions, and further elements they didn't have the budget or the technology for in the original. So far, this has been a surprisingly positive appraisal of the animation, but there definitely are a fair few concerns to raise. First of all, while the stylised toy side characters look excellent, the human characters are, well, awful. Their lips barely move, the motion is very awkward, and there's a massive uncanny valley effect from their vacant faces, which definitely shouldn't be the case for characters we're supposed to be relating to. They are an improvement from how they were in the Web of Fear, no doubt, but they're still quite far from being acceptable. The rest of the style working for this specific story does make up for it, but I don't think this is a style that will ever work for humanoid characters. Secondly, not all of the changes feel within keeping of the original's intentions. For example, there's a scene which is very reminiscent of the Toymaker scene from The Giggle when he arrives at the unit base. There's a lot of insane, trippy visuals out of nowhere, which ends with, of all things, 20 Toymakers in a line drinking orange juice out of the TARDIS with a straw. The scene definitely has merit, but unmistakably smacks of more modern filmmaking sensibilities, which is what I want the liberties to avoid. I want it to feel like this is the kind of thing they would have made at the time if they had the technology or the budget to do so. Overall, the Celestial Toymaker animation is a very good attempt at using this CGI style, and it certainly has a lot of positives. There is no doubt that this is a vast improvement over watching the reconstruction, which couldn't be said for the Web of Fear episode 3. The imagination and changes are mostly positive, really adding to the story while keeping within its spirit. But despite all this, the fatal flaw which stopped this being what I'd call a good animation on the whole is the human characters. While better than in Web, the character models are borderline unwatchable a lot of the time, particularly when there's a dialogue heavy scene. Given the budget they have to work with and the difficulties of translating TV to animation, I don't think they should ever use this style again. This story in particular just about gets away with it, as the focus on more visual storytelling with less dialogue lends itself better to this method. But there are no other unanimated missing stories like this, and in fact what is left is mostly dialogue and character heavy, which is absolute fucking kryptonite to this style of animation. Unlike Web Episode 3, I do recommend picking this up for your collection, as it is the best way of watching the Celestial Toymaker, but it certainly isn't without its issues.